Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steelers Sanctuary podcast. I'm your host, David Barrow from SteelersSanctuary.com. Today, we've got Ron Lippock with us and a very special guest, Kevin Gilbride, longtime offensive coordinator in the NFL, including 2 years with the Steelers in 1999 and 2000. Kevin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Uh, I'm sure you're familiar. The Steelers just hired a new offensive coordinator. I wanted to ask you a few questions about the process and things like that. It seems like the Steelers are going to keep a lot of their staff. Is that something that is usual when you become an offensive coordinator with a football team? Like not to be able to pick your own quarterback coach and offensive line coach and things like that?
I would say more recently, it has been fairly common that they allow the coordinator to have a say or be involved in the selection of the people that are with him. But for example, when I joined the Houston Oilers back in 1989, I was the only new coach. And technically, it didn't have the title coordinator under Jerry Glanville, but I was the quarterback coach calling the plays and coordinating the offense. So from that point on, it seemed like every job I took, it was the same situation, the same scenario. I just had to be sensitive to that one because I just spoke at Warren Moon's enshrinement at Houston Tuesday night. He was selected into the Houston Hall of Fame, Sports Hall of Fame. So a lot of the others there was a great reunion. But anyhow, when we finished our run there, we went to Jacksonville. Tom Coughlin had just become the head coach of Jacksonville. Well, he brought his old Boston College staff there. I was brought in as the coordinator, so that it was all I had no say. So
Yeah.
when I came to the Steelers after becoming the head coach of the Chargers, when I came to the Steelers, they were all in place. I came by myself. So is it unusual? Then when I went to the Bills, it was the same way. So I was the only new guy. It definitely, I don't know, it complicates things a little bit. And it complicates it depending on a few factors. One, how well, obviously, does the staff get along? Are you able to mesh? Are you able to convince them to think the way you do? If you can, then it's beneficial because you get a little bit of better insight than you normally would as to what the players were like, what their strengths, what their weaknesses are. And then to me, it's always nice to hear different views or perspectives on how to do things. You have your ways. That's one of the things, one of my pet peeves, as I see some of these young guys that have gotten coordinators positions, not that they're not bright young men, not that they're not terrific coaches, but in terms of knowledge of the entire pie of offensive football, they got their slice. They got their little bit of, their system, their idea of how, this is the way to do things, which is great until all of a sudden a defensive system or a defensive approach or game plan shuts that system down and they don't have an answer. Like when I see certain guys just getting run over blitz-wise, and I said, I just want to shake my head. So I think to have the ability to get some different ideas and you to continue to grow, I think it's a good thing. And I know in a very wordy, verbose way, I'm saying, is it unusual? I hear all these stories that people are able to have, a little bit of input, who they bring in, how many guys they have that they can bring in. And yet throughout my career, which was 25 years, that never happened to me. I always came in as the coordinator and the rest of the staff was already in place.
Hey, Kevin, I wanted to ask you sort of a secondary question on that, because when you come in, I assume that there's an agreement before you come in on the scheme you're going to run and sort of how you're going to implement the scheme. But, how do you as a coordinator come in and really adapt your scheme to talent, or is it sort of the other way around? Because, you hear, you should play to your talent, but a lot of folks, to your point earlier, come in and they've got a scheme and they're going to implement that scheme maybe before they even fully get what all that talent's like. What are your thoughts on that?
That's the, age old question, that's been haunting or stimulating discussion the entire career. You obviously have to take into consideration what's available to you, how good you are. Like, for example, without demeaning or or downplaying anybody, but I've had situations, for example, with the Houston Oilers when we had a terrific offensive line. Well, it was easy to leave guys one-on-one. They could, for the most part, play effectively and successfully and block their counterparts on the defense. And as long as we, mixed in enough runs, mixed in enough three-step passes, draw plays, screens, they more than adequately held their own. I've been in many situations where that's not the case. And so now what do I do? Well, I may be sliding the line so I can get a double between the tackle and the guard on that 3 technique, and I get the center and the guard on that 2-eye, the offset nose guard. And there's only 1 out of the 4 guys on defense that are getting one-on-one. The other 3 are getting doubled because the back's helping one tackle, the guard and tackle are doubling the other. So you're making constant adaptations or modifications, and yet you're still trying to run your same system, but you have to survive. You have to give your guys a chance, and if they can't handle a certain problem or situation on their own, then you've got to be able to adjust and do that. But yet you are hired because of your scheme, because of your knowledge of a certain way to approach. That's why. I mean, otherwise, why did the head coach hire you? He hired you because of your knowledge. I'm assuming, there's been people. Well, I'll give you an example. John Gruden used to, when he was working for ESPN, used to love to kind of chide me or tease me a little bit. Kevin Gilbride, 2008, you're leading the league in rushing. Wow, blah, 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 blah. I remember when you just threw the ball, you led the league in passing your 5 years at Houston and at Jacksonville. Now you're running ball. And I would say to him, John, I call the plays, I put together the offensive game plan, but I'm not the head coach. I know the parameters that my head coach wants me to function within. And so do I adjust? Yeah, of course I do. He's the ultimate boss. I'm assuming, and I can't imagine it's not that way, that the Steelers don't know what Arthur Smith is going to do offensively or want to do offensively. Now, if you do and you don't like it, why would you hire him? It just makes no sense in the world. Does that mean that now when he gets there, that he's not going to have to, tailor some of the things that he would like to do to the available personnel? Of course he does. Otherwise, he's not going to be successful.
Yeah, piggybacking off that, Kevin, Kenny Pickett is the Steelers quarterback, and he hasn't done a lot of under center play action stuff, which is what Arthur Smith seems to like to run. Is that a difficult transition for a quarterback who's been in shotgun a lot in his college and pro career, then go under center and do a lot of play action stuff? Is that a difficult transition for Kenny Pickett?
It's a challenge. There's no question. You're stepping out of your comfort zone, and can it be done? Yeah. And I mean, yes, it can be done. And if he's the right makeup, and one of those great quarterbacks, like again, Tuesday night when I spoke about Warren, I always spoke about, here he was at 38 years of age, and he would ask me a month before we started our OTAs, hey, you think maybe you and I can get out there and throw a little bit? I want to see if I could still spin it. And I said, here's a guy who spun it as well as anybody ever played the game. But that was the, I don't want to say it's professionalism, but that was the drive he had to master things. And he wanted to make sure that his footwork and the kinetic chain of throwing the ball, the timing of everything was exactly as it should be before we went out and had, worry about routes or coverages or anything else. And this is a guy who was 38 years old, had played, how many years up in Canada, and had already been 10 years in the, he was 16, 17, 18 years in professional football by then.
Yeah.
If this kid's the right kid, he'll want to do whatever it takes to make that part of his area of expertise. He'll want to do whatever he can to master that. Is it a growth process? Yes. I always said people judge a young quarterback, his rookie year. It's not fair. It's just not fair. There's just too much to learn and absorb. In the second year, always said, now I have a feel for whether or not this guy's got a chance to be good. Does that mean he's going to be phenomenal? No, it doesn't. It just means I can judge now whether he has the chance, if he continues to work, if he's able to stay injury free, if we're able to surround him with the right teammates, he's going to, right players in the spots that we need. I can tell that there's a pretty good chance, but it takes a while to learn a system. It takes a while to master, the fundamentals of what that offense is doing. And if that's something that's completely foreign to what you did in college, obviously that interferes and impedes and lengthens the process before he reaches the level of expertise he needs to be, to perform at a high enough level to give his team a chance. And one of the frustrations that I always have is that, you come in and a young guy comes in, he's not successful immediately. And particularly some guys that are really good players, they are potential to be really good players. And so what happens? They don't get rid of the player, so they get rid of the coordinator. Now the guy brings in a new system, and now he's starting from scratch again. And he never gets a chance to become really, really good at what he, or come close to reaching his potential, because he's constantly starting all over. For example, the New York Giants, the last team I coached with, the young man, Daniel Jones, every time I went to see him play, which is not often, but I'm still breaking down film for, either it was for Chris Collinsworth for 7 years, and the last 3 years I've been doing it for the Monday Night Football with Eli and Peyton. So I'm still watching guys, and I can see who can play and what offenses are really fun to watch, and ones you're cringing at because they're really, really struggling. This quarterback, Daniel Jones, they have, every time I saw him, I said, boy, the kid's got a lot of skills. He can run. He can throw the ball well. He looks like he's, everything I've heard, he's got the right makeup in terms of work ethic and preparation and what have you. But it seemed like every year or two, they didn't win enough. They didn't win quickly enough. They're changing the coach. And the poor kid, this is his 4th year in. Well, to me, it was his first year 4 times over. That's all it was. And he just never got a chance to reach, and then it looks like it, hopefully it's not starting all over again. He's going to be able to stay in the same system. And then the next thing that he struggled with is a little bit with his health. But part of that is part and parcel of the same thing. The better you learn something, the faster you're getting the ball out of your hands, the quicker you're getting to your check off, or your dump off, and where your outlets are, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess I'm getting again. Is it difficult? Yes. Does it maybe slow down how quickly he's going to reach his full potential, whatever that is? Yes. Can he do it? He should be able to.
Hey, Kevin, you've in your tape watching and sort of analysis that you've been doing, have you done any on Kenny? And what are your, I guess just sort of off the cuff thoughts on what Kenny needs to do to take that next step, and whether you think honestly that he can be a top 10 or so quarterback in the NFL?
Again, I do one game and then I do another 8 games. So in the season, so I don't remember exactly. I thought last year I was surprised at how good he looked. He looked like a big, strong kid that can run. Made some nice throws down the field. That's my memory. I don't even remember seeing him this year. So it depends what game. The Mannings don't do every Monday night game. So if he wasn't on that game that we were doing, I may not have seen him, or I did one later in the year. Of course, he wasn't even the quarterback. Somebody else was. So,
yeah. What about Mason? Was it Mason the quarterback then?
Yeah, he was. He looked okay. I'm not sure he looked like he had as much physical talent or potential, I should say. But there's been a lot of great quarterbacks that if you just judge them on size and arm strength and what have you, you would never give a Drew Brees a chance. Yeah. Guys like that.
So you're working with the Mannings now on the Monday Night Football thing?
Yeah. They like to keep it quiet. They want everyone to think it's all in there. Entirely their analysis. No, it's fun. And of course, I had the pleasure of working, privilege of working with Eli for 10 years. And, there's a guy that's the personification of work ethic and professionalism. And, he just, we would go in, like, for example, Thursday was always our 3rd down day where we get in in depth of our presentation on that. And if something came up that was a unique pressure, a blitz, that our normal protection rules or normal adjustments to the, protection rules didn't take it, didn't account for that, then we would have to jury rig a way to, how do we block that thing without, changing rules that have been in place, for some of these guys for 6, 7, 8 years. You can't tell them, well, all of a sudden this happens, you got to do, well, coach, for 8 years, I didn't have to react that way. Now you're telling me I got to react. Yeah. So we would come up with something. And inevitably it would be, you're getting late at night as you're trying to solve this last piece to the puzzle. And I would say, all right, let me just call Eli. And I'll call Eli and maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And I would say the same thing. E, I'm sorry to be bothering you so late. Coach, no problem. I'm just watching film. And, he'd go to home, he'd have dinner, he'd play with his kids. And when they went to bed at 8 o'clock or so, then he'd start watching the film. He's already watching what we were going to talk about and present the next day, so that he could anticipate what the problems were going to be, or what he saw as potential solutions or ways to get after them before we even talked about it with him from coaches down. He was already giving it some thought, considerable thought, to, what were the potential problems. And I would say to him, hey, I can solve this problem by making it a 3-down call, going with our ram or lion call, and then you bring the back over. Or I can solve it by making it a 4-down call and make the Mike call here and make it a lucky call to solve it that way. He said, Coach, if you could do it that way, that would make more sense to me. And that's the way I do it. Next day when I present it, it would be that way, because on game day, he's the one that had to identify the pressure that was coming and make the solution. If it didn't make any sense to him, then it would be hesitation, and maybe we wouldn't make the correct adjustment, what have you. But that's the kind of effort that it takes. So unless you're in the meetings with those guys, you just don't know, you don't know what it's incredible motivation, the ones that are great. It really is. It's fun to be around them because they can't live without, it's just something inside them that makes them work so hard because they have to excel. It's just within, they need to, it just, their God-given ability with their arm strength and their, size and their running ability, but it's also those intangibles that make up the difference, in my opinion, between the ones who are successful and great. And, when you see the great ones and you're fortunate enough to have one, count your blessings.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you get into a new team, how do you implement a new system? So how do you approach that? I spoke to Todd Haley about that, and he said the biggest mistake he made, as an example, was not calling Ben before he traveled to Pittsburgh and started working with the team. And he said he had to sort of not repair damage, it wasn't that bad, but he had to sort of get Ben to sort of get on board, right? How do you get a team on board and buying into the system and implement that system? What does that look like as a process?
Well, again, some of the times that places I went, it was, we want you as the coach, but we want what we do. Yeah. So the adjustment was on my end, not on their end.
Was Pittsburgh like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no question. But, there was not, the nice thing about that was, I'll take you back 2 steps before the Steelers, is that when I started with the Houston Oilers, Jerry Glanville, we were hybrid. We were normal, West Coast offense with 2 tights, 2 backs, 1, all that stuff. And then half the time we were what he called the red offense, and that was 4 wides. Well, it was the run and shoot is what it was. Yep. And then when he got let go, or was able to get out of his contract and go to Atlanta, he implemented the same thing. But Jack Pardee got called in as our head coach because he was running the run and shoot at the University of Houston at that time. And when he came in, we went 100% run and shoot. That's why he had gotten a job. So I already knew some of the offense and what have you, but it was just, I could continue to call the things the way I had called them under Jerry Glanville, but it was the true run and shoot 100% of the time. When we went to Jacksonville, Tom Coughlin hired me because he had been putting in some parts of the run and shoot from his last year or two, I guess, maybe the last year at Boston College. But when I went there, he made me use their terminology and their verbiage and what have you. Now, I put in the stuff that they had, and then I added or augmented with what they had done with what I wanted to do or how I did it. And we kind of worked it out and meshed it together. And he was an active participant those first 2 years. When I took over at the Giants, you know, he wasn't involved at all. So, I mean, he was the head coach. He ran the show, but he wasn't an active participant in our offense. But by then we had already, you know, had a relationship. I knew what he wanted. And you know, I put together the game plan. I called the plays and I would have you. But I always was very cognizant of, you know, hey, he didn't want to throw it too much. He wanted, you know, where we were in the Giants to be a run team, to be a play action team, and then as well have our run and shoot principles in our drop back game. But the things that I learned when I went to Jacksonville was his verbiage. Now that verbiage was the same verbiage that the Pittsburgh Steelers used because they all came from the same source. They came from Ron Earhart. So Ron Earhart had been the predecessor at the Steelers, I think 2 or 3, you know, coordinators before I went there. But the verbiage was easy for me because it was verbiage that I was very familiar with. And when I became the head coach of the Chargers and left the Jacksonville Jaguars, I just took that with me. So when I went to Steelers, it was the same terminology. So that part was easy. Now learning that what, you know, the players' ability were, that quarterback, you know, Cordell Stewart was a lot different than what, you know, what quarterbacks I had before, Warren Moon or Mark Brunell or what have you. But we kind of tailor-made it. You know, when I got there, he'd already been benched for Mike Tomczak the year before, and then for Ken. It's that year. So it took a while before I could get him, you know, to do the right things because he had gotten, you know, there's an example of a really gifted athlete that we had to make more of a quarterback, discipline, recognizing coverages, not playing by the seat of your pants, but zeroing in on a read that took you to one side of the field and got from a general read to a very specific and narrow read to get him so that he was utilizing his immense physical skills. But there's a lot to playing the quarterback position, and the physical skills aspect is just one part of it. Again, that's what people say, oh, they make so much money. And I say, yeah, they do. They really do. But you know what? They're so hard to find the great ones. They deserve it.
Do that with a guy like Cordell, though, right? Where you've got a guy who's got all those physical skills. You want to have him leverage those skills, right? I know this is that age-old question, and I'm sure you've probably heard ad nauseum maybe, but how do you coach him to be a good pocket passer who makes the good reads, but yet still has the ability and sort of the freedom, I guess, to make those sort of freewheeling plays, you know, a la Troy Polamalu on defense, you know?
Yeah, it's a challenge and a half because most of them have gotten away with things. And what they've gotten away with is because of their athleticism. And so they become totally, they may be neglected. It's like a guy playing basketball that can only go to the right. And there's going to come a time where they're not going to let you go to the right. They're going to make you go to the left. And if you can't do that, then you got a problem. Now, there's quarterbacks, you know, that are like that need some, you know, some convincing that this is an approach that in the long run will make you a better player. You know, maybe that practice, that's all you do is make them do everything, finishing to the left, driving to the left, starting to the left, spinning back, you know, in basketball. Football, it's the same thing. You got it. There's a fine line between making him a disciplined, I don't want to say system quarterback, but where he's doing what he's supposed to be doing on that play, going through the progression that he's supposed to be going through without handcuffing him, without taking away his some of the things that got him to that spot to begin with. And that's a fine line. And with Cordell, it took us a while. Now, it took us a while. We started that last year I was there. I think we were, oh boy, I know we won like 7 or 8 of our last games, out of the 10, because we started really poorly. We went with Ken to start with, and then finally turned it around. But sometimes you're dragging those guys kicking and screaming, and all you're trying to do is help them, and all you're trying to do help. I just remember early on, he'd make a throw, and everybody, great throw, and I'd say, what made you go over there? Why did you throw it to that side? Well, you got to give me a reason, because based on what the coverage was and based on the way they were playing, you should have been going here. Well, you made it to convince somebody, say, wait a minute, I just made a great play. That was a great throw. Yeah, it was. But guess what? Throwing to the wrong spot based upon that coverage over the long haul is going to, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot more often than you're going to make that great throw, that perfect throw. That's what needed to be made on that play. So tell me why. And so to get him to finally, hey, all right, I'm reading it, I'm going to the right spot, which down the road was going to make him a better player without taking away, hey, when the pocket breaks down or you don't feel comfortable with it, pull it down and run, utilize your God-given skills, which are, this is a big, strong kid that could run with the receivers. I mean, he was an extraordinary athlete. It takes time, but once he starts to get a little bit taste of it, boy, I think now your job is to help him reach his full potential, not to make him robotic in your system. But how do you make him better and achieve whatever his ceiling is, or get him as close to that as you can? That's your job.
Kevin, I want to go back a few steps. You interviewed for the Steelers head coaching job with when Bill Cowher was hired. What was that interview like, and how close do you think you got to actually getting that job?
Well, you'll have to ask those guys for that one, but no, I know this. I'm probably telling too many tales out of school on this one. They had a hard time getting permission. The Oilers were not allowing them to interview me, and of course, you can't do that. That was against the rules. I
was just going to ask you that. You were just a coordinator, right?
So finally, I wound up. I'm telling too much on this one. I'm giving.
That's okay. You can do it.
Yeah. Where somehow I got word. Let's just say that this was going on behind the scenes, and I just went into the Oilers and said, "Wait a minute, what did?" And no, wait. And then sure enough, that afternoon, I got permission to interview with the Steelers. Well, that was like a Friday. Cowher and Wannstedt were coming back that Saturday for their second interviews.
Yeah.
So there was some finagling. The interview went well enough that Friday or third, whatever the timetable was, Thursday, Friday. I don't remember exactly, but I just was kept over, and my interview morphed into a second interview. And when I left, Dan Rooney said, "I'd like to meet with your wife Monday. Is that all right?" So he was going to fly to Houston. So I think I was pretty close.
That's an interesting request.
Yeah, and he wanted to meet with her. So, I mean, I thought I had the job.
What did she say, Kevin?
Well, what happened was, I got a call Monday or Sunday night, all of a sudden pushing it back to Tuesday.
Yeah.
And then I got a call Monday pushing it back to Wednesday. So I knew something was going on. And then when Mr. Rooney called me that Wednesday, I think it was, again, I don't remember the exact date, but it was, I've gone in a different direction, and this is, and I said to him, well, you made the wrong choice. You know, he said, I knew you'd say that. I knew you would feel that way. I said, well, I do. He said, well, you're not alone. There's other people here who feel the same way. He said, there's one guy that didn't want you. He said, that was me.
Oh, wow.
And I said, why? He said, because even though you told me you wouldn't run the run and shoot here, you've had so much success. When things go wrong, as they always do, sometimes there's going to be some problems. You're going to want to go back to what you've had success doing. And I just, as I told you right from the beginning, we were interested in you. We were not interested in the run and shoot. We did not want that here. We wanted a much more traditional, physical, run-oriented type of offense, play great defense. And we just were impressed with you. We did not want the run and shoot. And I just could not reconcile the thought that when things would, you know, you're going to have struggles during parts of the season or one year from another. You're going to want to do those things that you've had this success with. And that's not what I want. He said, Kevin, I was standing right on the precipice. I was right on the cliff, ready to hire you. I needed somebody to push me over. He said, you didn't have anybody call from the Oilers. He said, I'm getting inundated with calls from the Cowboys, from Jerry Jones, from Jimmy Johnson, you know, for Dave Wanstad. And he said, Cowher was getting calls from the people, from Art Modell, from his time at Cleveland, from the people, the Hunt family, from Marty Schottenheimer, who they had great respect for. So bottom line is I was close, but no cigar. That's all that mattered. I got close, and I think I truly believe that I've been able to time it up with an early interview, found out what the hesitation was, that maybe I could have gotten some of the people. In fact, I think what the closing comment from Mr. Rooney was, the only guy that I spoke to on your behalf was Warren Moon.
Oh, wow.
Do you think that
how did you guys even know I got interviewed? I forgot that. I'm surprised. That's impressive.
We do our digging.
That had to be some digging. That's
a little birdie told us too, Kevin. So, Kevin, it seems like what's old is new, or what's old is still old, in a sense, in that it seems like we're still hearing that from the Steelers. They still want that physical, run-oriented offense. It feels like, you know, nothing much has changed. And do you think you can win that way in this day and age with a real power run offense and leaning on your defense? Is that a winning strategy in today's football?
No question. I mean, that you don't have to look too far to see you see what the San Francisco 49ers are doing and what the Baltimore Ravens were doing. Those are run-oriented teams that built their offense off of, you know, those kind of things. What people don't realize, there's advantages to being a shotgun, certain things, but there's advantages to be under the center. And the play action off of the run fakes is much more powerful, much more effective than the shotgun. The shotgun effect is, you know, fakes are not that they're ineffective, but they're not as effective. And it usually needs additional window dressing, all that extensive motion, or pulling the linemen to get the same draw on those underneath people to throw in behind them. But if you can do that under the center expands your running game, which then expands your play action passes. And I'll tell you what I learned more than anything, this, you know, referencing back to one of our earlier parts of our conversation, when I said some of these young coordinators who are brilliant young men who know exactly what they're doing within their system, all of a sudden that system needs some expansion. One of the things that I learned later in my career, as our line play deteriorated at the Giants, I began to appreciate the impact of the play action pass under the center in terms of giving the quarterback time to throw the ball down the field. I mean, it took me a while to think of play action pass as a way to augment or strengthen your protection. Well, if you saw us in a drop back at the end, you know, that quarterback was getting hit. Eli was getting hit like, you know, rushing everything. We couldn't push the ball down the field because you didn't have time to wait for them to get the extra 5 to 10 yards in their route running or their pattern. But all of a sudden, we do a great play action, and the defensive line had to react to the run rather than, which my thought had always been, how do we impact the coverage people? But here you got them to play the run for 1 second or 1/2, one count, 2 counts. And then you went back into your play, to your drop back to throw the ball after the run fake. Made all the difference in the world for the quarterback. All of a sudden, he didn't have a guy within 2 feet of him every time he's throwing the ball. There was 2 yards separation, 3 yards separation. You gave Eli Manning that kind of separation. Now, he was going to find an open receiver, and he was going to put it on the right guy, and he was going to throw it accurately. All we needed to do was give him a chance. So does it have merit to be under the center at times? Yes, no question. And a lot, you see a lot of the fancy motion shift and, window dressing of the Miami Dolphins offense. Do you know they're running the ball more than they're throwing it on 1st and 2nd down?
Yeah.
And it's half those passes, those timing passes, it's off those great run fake where they're freezing the linebacker. Now he's developed where most of it's in his gun. But to me, you look at some of those guys that are really doing the ball. I heard an interesting statement by, I think it was Josh McDaniel 4 or 5 years ago, before he got the job with the Raiders. And they said, the Patriots are going more, 2-back run, fullback and tight end and double tight end, back to the old days when you had to. He said, yeah, as the league is moving that way, we find it advantageous to be moving in a different direction. And so not only was it an approach that they liked, that they thought was going to give their team the best chance to be successful, but they liked the fact that they were doing something different. Right. So the defenses that were being geared up in terms of their personnel selection, getting smaller, getting lighter because they were faster. They needed the speed to do the things, to stop the RPOs, to make the tackles out in space. All of a sudden, we're much more vulnerable to just coming right at them. Right. And knocking them off.
I remember that very clearly.
It was an interesting comment, and I said, you know what? He's right.
I think the Steelers feel that same way. I think that's what Mike Tomlin wants to do with the way they've drafted and now hiring Arthur Smith. That seems the direction they're going.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about going back to the Steelers as an offensive coordinator under Bill Cowher. Was that a little strange for you? Having interview?
Yeah.
How was your relationship with Bill Cowher?
It was okay. It wasn't, it was okay.
Really? You being politically correct?
Absolutely.
So you two guys didn't hit it off?
It was fine. Professional relationship. Yeah.
All right, we'll move on. I want to do a couple quick hitters before we let you go. You've been fantastic. I want to thank you for coming on. Man, I can't do this interview without asking you about Buddy Ryan. Was he as big an ass in person as he seemed like on TV and in interviews and stuff like that?
Bigger.
Yeah, he seemed kind of obnoxious, right?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to do everything I could early on to be cooperative and, hey, here's what we're going to do. With camp, this is our installation schedule. If you want to work against us on 2 minutes or on red zone or goal line or 3rd down, or, here's when we usually do it. If you do it a different day, I can adjust, that stuff. There was never any, all of a sudden he would be coming up in Jack Party. Hey, could you do 2 minutes? I said, Coach, we just did 2 minutes yesterday. I said, I've given them an outline. I've tried to, whatever you want, we'll comment. But, during, as you get after the first, 2 weeks of training camp, you're already into your exhibition. So, one day you're focusing on your 2 minute, one day you're focusing on your red zone, one day you're working on your run game and your play. So all of a sudden now, the next day, that after you just did that segment, you want to do it. He wants you to do it again because that's what he wants. Come on. I'll just tell me what you want. We'll do it. But these are the aspects of the components of the game that I need to work on every week. And, you know, if I've already done that component for that week, then I can't afford to lose, you know, red zone or this or that, the other. So, yeah, it was not one of my favorite people. Let's leave it at that.
Speaking of difficult people, what about Ryan Leaf? I know he had quite
Yeah, and he was I'm convinced that I stayed, I would have helped the kid, and you know, he definitely had a lot of physical ability. Um, there was an immaturity at that point, and this was prior to his, you know, his problems later on with drugs and everything else. But it was just a matter of helping him, and I just think that, you know, eventually he would have, I could have gotten him to be reached his potential, but I only had him 6 games. It was, and he was young, but he was a big, strong kid. He couldn't run like some of the, I'm trying to, like the Bills quarterback, you know.
yeah, Josh Allen. Yep.
Just, but he, you know, he was big and strong. I mean, he was 6'4", 6'5", you know, 245, and had a rocket arm, and he could see things. He just needed to. He's one of those guys you got to convince. You have to work to reach your potential. You're in. This is the level of competition is improved just enough that you can't get by just on your skill set. You know, your that big arm, that the size, your toughness. So, you know, we were very close. You know, we were 2-4. We lost first 2 games. We won our first 2 games, and then we lost a game to the Giants, which we just really were outplayed, and then we lost a game to the Kansas City Chiefs that set back offensive football. I mean, it was one of those games that was a pouring rain, and I think we were 1 for 14 throwing the ball. He couldn't hold it. He fumbled 4 times. It was one of those things. And so now he was, you know how it is, those young quarterbacks. In the old days, when I first got in, those high draft picks didn't play the first year. They let them. Well, now everybody, and of course, it's even worse now. You're getting thrown in there. And the charges were awful. So, you know, our team wasn't very good around him. And sure enough, you know, he struggled because we were struggling, couldn't help him. But I do think that there was talent there. I do think there was a kernel of competitiveness that I could have tapped into. I just had to get to it. And I just think it would have taken a little bit longer to him. He didn't have the maturity of, you know, his counterpart that year was Peyton. You know, we had the 2nd pick. The Colts had the 1st pick.
Yep.
And here he was, the paradigm, you know, the personification of professionalism to then Ryan, who was not that cerebral in his approach to the game, you know, whereas Peyton was unbelievable. But Peyton only had 1 or 2 wins that year too. So it would have taken Ryan just a little bit long. But then again, then there's a new system, a new guy, then somebody else. So he never got really the chance to develop the way I really believe that he could have. And then, of course, then he started, you know, having all kinds of problems. And my heart goes out to him because he's certainly taking it on the chin a bunch.
Yeah. Ron, you got anything else before we get out of here?
No, I appreciate you jumping in and taking the time, Kevin. This was a lot of fun, and you know, I always love the stories and the candor. So thank you so much for doing it.
All right, you're very welcome. Talk to you
Yeah,
guys.
we
Bye-bye.
really appreciate it, Kevin, you coming on. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome.
All right. And thank you for listening to the Steelers Sanctuary podcast, guys.